Welcome to week number 9 of our class in leadership. So we're approaching the end. Next week will be the final exam. Today, what I want to do is to go through the 16 chapters of the book and to give you a brief summary of each of these chapters. I suppose they might help you to memorize, or at least to synthesize everything we did according to your book, and so make you be ready for the final of next week. Let me start with chapter number 1. Of course, chapter 1 is an introductory chapter, and of course is an introduction of the definitions. So first of all, what is leadership? And of course, there is this idea that there are rational leaders, emotional leaders, that leadership is a science. No, is much better defined as an art, which basically the whole thing goes to this idea that some people are born leaders, is one option, or that you can become a leader is the second option. And then your chapter links leadership management. So one of the great myths of leadership is that leaders are born, not made. And so this chapter is also a way to aggressively dispute this kind of idea. The framework according to which this book works is made of 3 elements: the leader, the followers, and the situation. And we will see that in every chapter, the leader or the followers or the situation becomes the focus of the attention. Of course, the leader, the followers, and the situation are linked together. So you have a leader, you have some followers, and everybody both are in a situation. So it cannot be the leader without the followers, because a leader without the followers is not a leader, is a solitary person. Chapter 2 is about the development of the leader. We just said that people become leaders. So how this is possible? And so your book comes with a bunch of suggestions called action, observation, reflection. So basically, there is the situation. The leader observed the situation, make a reflection, and then he decide the course of action. In this, I would say, little model, experience plays a great role, because, of course, the experience is about the perception and the observation. I perceive the situation, I observe the situation. From that, I move to reflection, and then I move to action. This is basically how the model is. And there is this idea of learning. There are 2 ways of learning called the single and double loop learning. The single is that I do something, I notice the result, and I try to do it better. The other one is that I do something, I learn about the return, whatever is the output, but then I start thinking, how can I change eventually my action? So in one way, the first way, the single loop, just say, hey, you know what, I did something, this is what I received back, I adjust to the situation. This double the loop learning says, no, I can change the situation. Or at least I can change the way I look at the situation. This is the thing. And so there are a few ways in which leaders can learn. Of course, leadership can be learned at school or in an organizational setting. They can be workshops in the organization. There are things like coaching and mentoring, which are basically forms of very personal training between the person who has to become a leader or he wants to improve as a leader, and somebody who eventually has been already a leader, or somebody who has experience in developing leadership. Chapter 3 is a kind of, I would say, plan to become a leader. And so it basically says, imagine to be in an organization and you have 90 days and you want to become a leader in these 90 days. So what you have to do the first day you have to make a first impression. Then you have to lay down the foundation of your leadership. Then you have to structuralize, basically give yourself a strategy about your leadership, your style of leadership. And then, of course, you have to communicate wherever you want to go and convince people to follow you. As is said in the previous chapter, one way of learning is, of course, by experience. And one of the suggestions in this case is, well, if you make it this test of 90 days as a leader, you might want to take a journal and to see how you are stretching your level of leadership along the way. With the journal, the personal journal, you can compare where you were and when you are right now, and basically prove that you are making basically progress. Of course, one of the core elements of leadership is competence. And so to be knowledgeable of the sector or the industry or the department of the area of business where you are is fundamental. But it's also fundamental to have a relationship with the followers, a relationship that is an effective relationship, basically, that brings result, but also an effective relationship with the superior. So basically, whoever is above you, because also that helps to define who is a leader. So a leader is somebody who has a good competence and is able to learn, is able to build effective relationships with the followers, but also with the superior. As you notice, is a complex feature that your book wants to propose. Chapter 4 is about power and influence. So power is the capacity to make things happen. So let's say you are a CEO and you want to open a new branch in Korea. And then you open the new branch in Korea, and this is called power. So power is the ability to bridge the gap between your intention and the reality. Influence, on the other side, is the ability to frame the ideas of people and convince people that basically you are right, or that your ideas are right, or that they can do certain things because you think are the right things to do. So there are different kinds of power. So the expert power is the power of the expert. The referent power is the power of people who knows and has good relationships with other people. The legitimate power is the power that received a formal approval by somebody. I remember I made the example of the instructor that received the legitimate power from the university, which received the legitimate power from the California state. There is a reward power that basically is the power to reward people, basically to give something to people who actually reach some goals or were successful. And the coercive power, which is exactly the opposite, is the power of punish people. So one reward power is the power of thank people, rewarding, and the coercive power is the power of punish. Chapter 5 is about ethics and values, basically what to bring in leadership, particularly in the case of leaders that belong to different generations. And so there might be a difference, a gap of understanding leadership in one generation and in the other. Of course, value-based leadership means that the leadership is based on values. And of course, the definition of values is whatever people think is important or what they believe. So chapter 6 moved from theoretical discussion about power, values, and ethics to what are the main elements of leadership. And the very first in your book is personality. What is personality? Is the way we are, or better, the way we feel. So the personality is, there are, of course, social people and solitary people, people more rational, people more emotional. And so the personality, how a person is, of course, impact the kind of leadership, because you can't ask a leader who doesn't want to talk with people to run for office. At the same time, if you are a scientist and you are head of a laboratory, you are not requested to go around in the world to ask people to be convinced by you. So, of course, personality matters. Then there is intelligence. Of course, intelligence means the ability to process a large amount of information and to come with a clear understanding of the situation itself. Your book also talks about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a way to bridge the gap between the intelligence and the action. And also the ability to have a kind of social impact with your intelligence, because you are able to create an emotional force around you. In chapter 7, there is another aspect of leadership, which is the leadership behavior. So the leadership behavior is, in my personal opinion, more interesting than, for example, the intelligence, the emotional intelligence, and the personality, because all these different elements, personality, intelligence, and so on, are very difficult to catch up because they are internal to the person. But the behavior, that behavior can be seen by everybody. The behavior is how a person behaves. So basically, it becomes easy to see basically if a person is more a social person, if a person is more a solitary person, if a person is leading by example, if a person is leading by just providing orders. So this is a more interesting chapter for us to understand leadership Your book goes into, of course, some studies about leadership behavior. To be honest with you, the studies about leadership behaviors are enormous. There is an enormous amount of that. Chapter 8 is about the ability to, the skills for building credibility and so influencing other people. So what are the aspects that build credibility? According to your book are two. One is the expertise. So you need to know what you're talking about. And the other one is the ability to build trust. So expertise plus trust means, for your book, credibility. Another aspect that, of course, allow the leader to influence other people is communication. This is the most important element for influencing, because a leader is not something that can order all the time. And by the way, influencing is not commanding. Influencing is convincing people, and of course, communication is the most important in that. But quite appropriately, your book, immediately after communication, introduced the idea of listening. And he makes a very clear case, not of a fake listening, not of a formal listening, but a real listening that allowed the individual to feel that the leader is really listening. And so, by the way, listening allowed the leader to understand better the person, to understand better his or her message, and allowed listening allowed people to break walls of communication. There are other things that are included in this chapter. For example, assertiveness, that basically means that you know what you're doing and you are not afraid to show it. The ability of managing groups and meetings, the ability of making decisions under stress. Not only for you, but also for the people around you. So stress management is the ability for you to remain cool under stress, but also to help people, the followers around you, to do the same. Another thing, of course, is problem solving. The leader has to identify the problem and solve it. And as I said other times, to identify the right problem is a peculiar aspect of leadership. Not just identify a problem, but identify the main problem. That is. So we are now at chapter 8, but with chapter 9, we start a series of, I'll say, three chapters that are about the leader helping people, managing the followers, basically the relationship between the leader and the followers. That's and we start with chapter 9, where basically the idea is, well, the leader must be able to motivate, satisfy, and increase performance of the followers. And your book comes with a distinction between motivation and satisfaction. The motivation is the reason why we do certain things. Your book offers, I think, 4 or 5 different models to understand how motivation works. And the most famous, you remember, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That basically says that when you solve one need, immediately a new one comes out. And so the motivation is to create a new needs in order for the people to move up Or if you like, another way to put it is because you know that people have always new needs, to be able to use these new needs to motivate people. The satisfaction is a different thing because satisfaction refers to the fact that when I go to work, I'm happy. I'm doing a job that makes me satisfied. I make a job that is meaningful to me. And so also in these cases, there are different models to understand satisfaction. But the real point of the chapter is if you understand motivation and if you understand satisfaction, you can influence the followers. You as a leader can influence the followers. Chapter 10 is about the leadership of groups and teams. And the difference between groups and teams is that the teams are groups formally constituted. So the groups are informal people coming together for different reasons. They have to structure in somehow the ways they want to stay together, but sometimes they don't feel the need because they are informal. The teams on the other side need to be formally established. They need some kind of rules of the game. They need some outputs, they need some visions, they need some goals. The point of the chapter is to focalize your attention on the fact that to lead individuals and to lead a group of people or teams is a different matter. Basically, this is the idea. One small section of chapter 11 is about virtual teams or virtual groups, which of course are a little bit more complicated or at least different to manage and lead. Chapter 12 is, well, basically, chapter 12 says, okay, if a leader, one of the jobs of leaders is to develop other people, what are the skills of the leaders that allow them to develop the followers? And of course, the chapter comes with a lot of options and suggestions. One is setting goals. So basically, if you, as a leader, are able to set the goals for the followers, it becomes easier for the followers to understand where they are going, to focus, and that, of course, allow the followers to grow. Another one is to provide constructive feedbacks. Constructive means feedbacks that allow the person to grow. Another one is, well, there are different models, but one model offered by your book is called the rocket model. Basically says, hey, to develop other people is a combination of different elements. And I'm going to list the elements. So the first element is a mission. Of course, what we are here to do, the development of talent, that means the capacity to understand the expertise, the technical competence. The norms basically means the rules of the games. The buy-in, that basically means the member of, for example, of a team, of an organization, to accept, to become members of the project that the leader has in mind. The results, the fact that the team has to reach certain results and actually is able to reach these results. And of course, the morale. Morale means in a project, there is always, in an enterprise, there is also a moment of sadness, moment of dissatisfaction, failures, and of course, part of the job of a leader is to sustain the members of his team or her team in order that these people are able to pass through these moments of difficulty. Apart from the rocket model, your book comes with, as I said, suggestion to skills that the leader needs to have in order to develop in others. We said setting goals, providing constructive feedback, building team with the rocket model, but also delegating. Delegating means to provide power to the followers. And finally, coaching, which is training, personally train the followers. This is probably the most effective of the ways in which the leader can help followers to grow. And with that, with this chapter 11, we ended the part related to the followers, how the leader can manage the followers. And we enter in another section, which is more focused on the situation. You remember, there is a leader, there are the followers, and there is the situation. And until now, we discuss the leader, we discuss the followers, we discuss the relationship between the leader and the followers, and now it's time to introduce this idea of the situation. So what is the situation? The situation can be three different things. One, the task. So what you are supposed to do. The task might be, I have to develop a marketing campaign, or I have to reach a more 5% business in my company, or I have to provide financial funds to my company, or I can just be a financial director. This is the task. Then there is the organization, basically the place where I am, the kind of business where I am, the company in which I am. And then there is the environment. The environment is, of course, much bigger, is the context, and means if I am in a business, in which kind of industry I am, who are the competitors, how is the market, if there are legislations, and so on. In chapter 13, the leader and the situation come together. Basically say that the leadership must be seen in a different way according of how you see the situation. So, for example, in a situational leadership model, the leader is made by the situation. So I remember I made the example of we are in a situation of risk, we have in a situation of survival, the formal leader disappears, and suddenly somebody jump and become the leader. So that is basically the situational leadership model. So the situation makes the leader, and not the leader makes the situation, control the situation, and so on. Another model is called contingency model, and basically says that different styles of leaderships are necessary for different situations. And I remember I made something like, if you are at the very beginning of the story of your company, of course, you need some kind of leadership, a style of leadership. If you are in a mature situation, you need a more mature. Chapter 14 addresses the big topic of leadership and change. So change is important in an organization because the market is changing, the competition is changing, the environment is changing. So the leader must be able to produce change inside the organization. So the so-called organizational change. So the rational approach to organizational change is very simple. So you define the plan, you have a vision, you have a mission, you have a plan, you have resources, and then you push the organization in that direction. And of course, you encounter resistance, and you have to find a way to fix this problem of resistance. But there is another way to do organizational change, which is a charismatic and transformational leadership, which basically means you have to convince people. Some charismatic means that you seems unique, you seems credible, you seems different than the others. And so people start following you because they start believing in you. And so this transformational leadership is the leadership is able to transform the company because the leader is perceived as charismatic, as believable. So what are the characters or the characteristics of this leader? Well, it needs to have a vision. So basically needs to tell very clearly where the people need to go. Rhetorical skills means that he's able or she's able to convince. He has to build trust. You remember we already mentioned building trust, and he is able to personalize the relationship with the followers. But also the followers needs to have some kind of characteristics that makes them suitable for a transformational leadership. And one of them, one of the skills, is the willing to be subordinated to the leader. Because if they want to be subordinated to the leader, everything, of course, it becomes quite easily. Another one is that are emotionally involving or involvable. That means that the charismatic leader can use emotions to convince these people because these people are emotionally involvable. And of course, also the situation is to have some kind of characteristics. Probably the most important is that is a situation of crisis. Because there is a situation of crisis, the leader really need to do something, and the followers are more ready to follow the leader because there is a crisis. Chapter 15 is called the dark side of leadership, basically the fact that leadership can be used by bad people for bad things. And so this is something I have nothing else to say, it's true. But there is also another side, a dark side of leadership, which is the incompetence. The fact that the leader is incompetent. So basically, he doesn't know what he has to do. And more important, he doesn't know, is not competent of the business in which he or she is operating. And then finally, there is the case of the managerial derailment. It basically means that at the beginning, everything seems fine, but then the leader fails. And there are many different reasons why he fails. Well, because the situation changes and the leader is unable to adjust because the leader is lack of self-awareness. So the ability to understand himself or herself and to understand what, why, or in case he or she is making mistakes or something. But there is also the case that the dark side comes from the followers, that followers prefer to be fired rather than to follow. That is one possibility. And finally, in chapter 16, there are the skill necessary for the leader to change the situation. You remember that in chapter, I think it was chapter 11, yes, there were some skills for developing others. Well, in chapter 16, there are skills for create change in the situation. And also in this case, there are some few suggestions. One is creating a vision that is compelling, basically that the people can believe in this vision. Managing conflict, because change brings conflict, and the ability to manage all this conflict for the best is important. The ability to negotiate, because when you change, there are people that lose power, people that gain power. And so a negotiation is necessary to make sure that everybody is somehow on board. The fact that the leader is able to identify what are the problems of individuals, the problems of groups of people, the problems of the organization at all. And so the identification of a problem, I can't stress less, is very important. And then, of course, there are the ability to build teams that allow the situation to change. And finally, the ability to use punishment for the good and not for the bad. So this is basically, your book is a huge book, is many pages, but I try to summarize in every chapter. I try to extract what is the main point of a chapter to allow you to address this chapter in the easiest way, because you know already what is the core of this chapter. And I try to do the same today. So I hope this work of summarizing the main point of every chapter is useful for you. And I take the opportunity also to thank you very much for taking this class. And I wish you the best of luck for the final exam.